All right, welcome back. It's the April 28th, 2026 AIX Higher Ed podcast weekly update. And we're ready to talk about a couple of issues that have been kind of brewing this week, and things are happening really fast. And there's a lot happening that we want to kind of wrap up with at the end to say where we are maybe on this curve. The first that we wanted to mention is that we've heard reference to this January 2020 COVID moment. And are we in that COVID moment now? The first time we heard this was in this interview in the upper left with Kyle Chase and Emad Mostaque, who was talking a bit about how we're just months away from this really taking off. And he referenced we're kind of in January 2020. And Mostaque, who is, of course, a regular on Moonshots and has written a book about the way economics and the economy will work, and has discussed a little bit how he's the founder of Intelligent Internet, what they're able to do with distributed AI. He's thinking that we're really close to the point of it just really taking off. And we're going to see everybody is just experiencing kind of that COVID moment. We're just looking in on it, and it's just a little bit out of reach at this stage.
Yeah. And then, the same thing, I think we had mentioned this before here on the podcast, but there was another interview with Sam Altman. He says, oh, it's like January 2020. I remember walking around, I think it was San Francisco where he was living, and I'd look in the restaurants and I'd see all the people, and I knew this wasn't going to last because COVID was spreading and it's going to spread exponentially. And, hey, I understand exponentials. Most people don't. And I kind of remember that same feeling, not because I have the same level of understanding of exponentials, but just because I'd been in China and I saw how much they were doing to control it, and it was still spreading, and there were no efforts at all to really stop the spread in the U.S. Until March. So I knew it was going to explode. So I had the same feeling, and I've kind of been feeling that way a little bit about AI. You just walk around and you realize most people have no idea what's going on. But, we'll talk about, how strong the analogy is at the end. But it's something you should maybe think about. We'll kind of pull back on this, what we talked about, during the podcast, to think about, well, are some of the things that we're talking about, are they suggestive of this idea that we're starting to get into exponential growth of AI? And one thing, obviously we talk a lot about AGI, human level intelligence, and a lot of some of these references we're going to talk about kind of suggest that we're there, that we're going to surpass it. And, this first one, just from Nick Bostrom, he's been making the argument that we're basically kind of at human level intelligence, right? At least in a lot of areas. And maybe in an overwhelming number of areas where we use intelligence the most. And he said he's kind of surprised that we've just kind of been in this holding pattern where it's basically been around human level intelligence for so long. And as we see, maybe it's gonna, maybe we're in a breakout moment and it's going to start to go a little bit faster.
Then there's this other reference that was coming from this tweet talking about Demis Hassabis. And we've talked about Hassabis, and of course, the founder of DeepMind, Google DeepMind, and leading a lot of the work that's being done in Google on AI. And Demis Hassabis has been a little more cautious in terms of saying that we're reaching AGI or when we could. But in this case, I think he's noticing that what Bostrom is kind of noticing is this idea that we've had kind of this extended growth with language-based AI. And now Hassabis and others are kind of pointing out is maybe there's more runway with this than we thought. And that might lead to a greater chance of reaching AGI sooner rather than later. This references that in a recent interview, he now says there's maybe only a 50-50 chance whether that's needed to have one or two more breakthroughs. In other words, we might already be at the point where there's enough of the technology there. It's a matter of refining it and continuing to train and grow the level of training that you would have. And his exact quote was, I think there's a 50-50 chance we still need some breakthroughs, maybe in world models, but my bet is still strongly on foundation models because of how successful they've been. This is quite a shift because people like Demis Hassabis and others were saying that, language models are not going to be enough. There have to be other big breakthroughs. World models could be part of that. And I think everybody's been pretty astounded to see how far the language models have been going and what you're able to do with generative AI. And that's just continues to compound as we see recent releases from GPT-5.5 and also from Anthropic.
And, just kind of a concrete example. I always like these math examples because, I can't really do any significant math, but it is saying this person who's 23 years old, says no significant math training. he solved a 60-year-old math problem that has been unsolved. It's one of the Erdos problems. And I saw the kind of the original tweet. Basically, he just let I think it was 5.4 ChatGPT 5.4 think for about 83 minutes, right? To just be like, hey, keep trying to solve this problem. And it found a proof, right? The proof existed, but it kind of eventually found a proof that could apply to the problem, apply it to the problem, and solve the problem, right?
Yeah,
Is that
pretty remarkable to
I
see
don't
what
know, but it's pretty smart. And if we want to think about augmenting intelligence, right? Here's someone who, probably had some like reasonable level of math skill, but nothing anywhere near, they said, kind of the level of the expert or expert training, was able to solve a 60-year-old math.
And I guess what we're seeing is that this is kind of an example of maybe a different way of thinking of jagged intelligence and the jagged frontier. We're starting to see little cracks where it's doing more than what we anticipated, and it's going a little further than what we thought it would be able to do. And you wonder at what point is it all going to just kind of cave in and it'll have a rapid change. We're starting to see more of these applications. Here's another story that Stefan shared from Bloomberg talking about prediction market traders. We talked several months ago when I think when I was testing out kind of an open claw, other people running open claws to have those bots rack up a lot of gains on prediction markets, and they're gaining momentum. It's really hard for a human trader to go in and make any money with these bots racking up those kinds of gains because they can do lots of fractional gains based on just early access to information, and that's not really new. It's just that now it can be done autonomously by anyone, not just by a big trader. But then you also have other algorithms being applied and other things these tools are doing that are just getting more and more advanced as they learn the techniques. And I think we're going to continue to see that grow.
Well, yeah, and the other thing I think is worth mentioning on that one is that they're outperforming the human traders, right? So, do we have ASI, artificial superior intelligence, in the area of trading? We might. I mean, they're going to be able to process more data faster, right? But that, this kind of an area where we're seeing it like push past human level intelligence, and in here, we talk about robotics. You can think about it separately, but the AI is basically the robot brain. Right. I say the Roman brain, but those are people, right? So it's really the robot brain, and playing, ping pong. It takes some eye hand coordination, but obviously it takes some kind of thinking as well. And now we finally have an AI ping pong player that can defeat a human and incredibly talented, not just someone like me, getting the ball back and forth over the net, right? But professional ping pong players, playing with strategy and all these types of things, and has tons of experience and is trying to get the ball into the right place. And it was an impressive. You should watch the video. It's impressive. It just defeats it. So now there's another area, maybe depending on how you define intelligence, another area. And then you could say kinesthetic intelligence too, body movement intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Just
it's
another area of advancement that
overwhelming.
we're finding. Yeah. Moving into the social realm, and we start to think about what this might mean for society. We've talked before about the worry of companion bots. This is a recent Fortune story just from this week, or just from about 10 days ago, that teen boys are starting to choose AI girlfriends over real ones. And this has been forecast. Everybody said this is probably going to happen because of less friction. And that idea of reducing friction is a common theme as we consider concerns in education, in the workplace, in society. If you have a path toward interaction that it requires less friction, you have more control, there's no worry about rejection, this just feeds into the loneliness epidemic. And certainly for young people and young men, it's something that becomes quite a crutch. And imagine for a young person not to develop those social skills the way anybody in previous generations would. And not that we all were very good at that, and we all probably had difficulty kind of managing that at different times, but this compounds it, makes it far more difficult. And if the individuals are going to be doing that, what does that mean for later societal interactions? And this idea that it can make them unemployable makes a lot of sense, because if they're not able to really interact or ask somebody out on a date, how are they going to be able to interact with conflict at work, or to be able to talk to a coworker, or interact with a client or a customer? It just really erodes the social skills that they have. And this is starting to compound because the AI tools, like an AI girlfriend, is getting much better and more convincing. And when you're young and you're already feeling like you're having trouble connecting, you would, of course, seek that out. And that's something that people are going to become really reliant upon.
Yeah, the other thing I just mentioned, I think the article gave the statistic of 20%. 20% of teenage boys. That's like that's so high.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
really
the
alarming.
next implication, programming jobs, people are saying hitting hard, right? There's kind of anecdotal reports, and some things out of particular professors are saying percentage of their students are struggling to get jobs. But this new study that came out from the Fed kind of really shows kind of the unemployment rates of programmers. Now, I have had certain positive news that basically every company now has to figure out AI. Right, and there's a lot of demand for people who kind of, even if they were CS majors, didn't have an AI focus or whatever, they understand the technology well enough that the demand for inside the companies is so high, they're kind of getting hired into these like quasi technical roles. The salaries for AI roles for people with technical knowledge in companies are really high right now, so that may offer some relief, but we're seeing like a traditional university major, students graduating, and this was one where like you pretty much could get a job. Um, you know, it's hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
It's certainly hard. I was on a faculty panel last week with some colleagues at other universities, and one of the other panelists was an economist, and they were asking about what job skills would you recommend students pursue, and giving the example of agentic work. If you have the ability to manage agents, then would that give you an edge? And he said the problem with it is that might not last very long. It's impossible to say what it's going to be like 6 months from now, and all of this is so changing so quickly that even that sense of some positive, some silver lining that Stefan's mentioning, how long is that really going to last? And it's going to be difficult to be able to manage that. It's not to be a doomsdayer, and to say it's all going to erode and all go away, but there's no way to really forecast that, and we have to be ready for a lot of rapid change as it continues. Thinking about that rapid change. And here's an example of something that I think we mentioned last week as an initial part of this story. And that's that Meta was getting ready to announce a number of layoffs, and they've announced about 10% of their employees will be laid off, about 8,000 workers. And soon before they did that and they announced it, they also said they were employing this new set of tools to monitor the employees. So it would track the screens, then keystrokes, and everything that they were doing, so that it was not opt out. It was not possible to opt out. And I also heard that there on internal Slack channels, there were people that were sharing. Remember, a number of years ago, people on Facebook misunderstood. They would post something saying, "I do not give Mark Zuckerberg the
Right.
right to use my photos," and so they were they were doing the same thing, kind of tongue in cheek, and also trying to protest a little bit. But there's no movement for Meta. This is something that they're committed to doing, and made it very clear there's no way to opt out. And this is really to train AI tools. And that's obviously a concern if you're thinking, okay, well, I'm not only worried about being laid off next month, but even if I'm not laid off next month, I'm training the tools that are going to replace me. And it's pretty clear that that's exactly what they're working on.
Yeah, yeah, and like think about it, they don't even tell you about their privacy or weird, bro. Why did you check the weather? Like, why did you check your personal email? Right? Like, let's see, you lost a minute of productivity. They're not even complaining about that, right? They're just like, I could be, replaced. And these are other stories, emerging. Obviously, there was this big dispute with, Anthropic, and people got angry at OpenAI for kind of signing contracts with the military. But Google's doing it. That's kind of getting ignored for as much of an uproar as there was about like OpenAI doing it, as opposed to, Anthropic drawing the lines in some areas. There's still, we talked about this, right? The NSA is using Anthropic, right? So, um, but it's just kind of another thing that, just the world changing so fast in such significant ways, and so many people just not understanding at all what's going on, just continuing to live in the world as it was.
Yeah. Now, a continuing story that we've touched on quite a bit, and I think we're going to be talking about more frequently, will be data centers, and of course the political repercussions. Lots of localities and regulators and states trying to ban data center construction, trying to deal with a lot of the public outcry. And in this case, there's a story about Meta turning to space-based solar energy in one way to be able to power AI data centers. And it's not just to be able to reduce the impact that it'll have on the local grid. They're still building that out too. It's also the recognition that the grid can't support many of the data centers that they're projected what they want to be able to build. And that'll be one way to ease some of the constraint. It's certainly not going to solve it, though.
And in this next, just talk about some applications. Right? We've been talking about the power of the models and generally kind of what they've been used for. But what about when somebody adds some software and a harness to it and fine tunes it on a certain training data set? What are some applications? The first, this jumped out because our friend David Cole is featured, in this Harvey. He worked with Harvey because we've talked to him, right? I'd love to get him on this podcast because he's always talking about how he uses Harvey and, some of the Westlaw AI tools and even just, some ChatGPT for things. He just uses kind of the AI a lot in his work. And here, that this kind of claim is made that you can do in an afternoon what it used to take like a whole team of attorneys with, all these banker boxes or whatever full of files to go through. That can all be done in an afternoon. And then, I also saw a story that, Anthropic is, they signed, I think a 3-year agreement with Freshfields, which is, a pretty significant law firm. I think they have like 5,000 attorneys, probably to just kind of do some of this stuff directly and kind of circumvent a little bit of the Harvey or, use it instead. Harvey was backed by OpenAI, and I think they use the OpenAI infrastructure. I don't know if they use any of the Claude, but then we see, just kind of going right into that space. And this is going to impact obviously the legal services industry. I read something that said it's worth $1 trillion. These companies are trying to suck up, some of that revenue. I mean, they won't be able to suck up as much because they're not going to be able to, get like $700 to whatever, $2,500 an hour for their work when it takes, when it takes a few minutes or an hour, right? But they're going to, they'll be able to build a portion of that. Some of the legal work will get done. It'll probably be harder for associates and juniors. And I always said just kind of smaller contract work, the litigators and big M&A deals and all that. You'll still have the humans at least for a long time. But, this is a pretty significant area that this technology is being applied to. And obviously you have a lot of kind of middle class, upper middle class, and some people making a lot of money, right, in the law, right? Millions a year, right? So that's like a whole sector of the economy that, and those people spend a lot of money back into the economy, right? So if you do start to see some employment reductions in those areas, even junior associates in New York make like 225, 250 is generally kind of the starting salary. So, that'll have an impact on the economy.
Certainly. I also, though, would cast a little doubt on the idea that it's going to reduce the amount, the value of the overall industry, because when this happens, it's going to radically increase the amount of legal work that's going to be done. And because there's going to be so many other developments in the economy, there's going to be a need for lots of other legal work. Will there be as many lawyers? Probably not. But will there be as many lawsuits? Many times as the number of lawsuits.
The ads can just start filing lawsuits. Because sometimes you think, oh, this thing happened to me. Maybe I should do it. You just like press a button. Maybe it'll upload your evidence. Oh, okay. It'll evaluate it whether or not you have it. You won't even have to go see one of those people on the billboards, right? They can, you won't even have to go to their office. But no, you're right. Like the dynamic will play out, but it's going to have a pretty big impact on how kind of law firms work and, how obviously their workflow, right? And
just another example of how that's going to play out in the economy, and it's going to happen in lots of different fields. Now, in this story, and I remember hearing a little bit more about this on Hard Fork, New York Times tech podcast, and it's the AI-run store in San Francisco, the Andon Market, which is set up as a convenience store, and it's pretty entertaining because they basically gave, I think, $100,000 and set up this AI agent to be able to run it, and the AI agent has made decisions about what products to stock, who it hired, even hired a male worker in the store, and 2 female workers, paid the male worker more. And when asked why, they say, oh, because of experience. And so there are all these questions about how it's representing bias in its own actions, coming from training data bias that maybe training data that was exposed to, and then also some of the mistakes that were made by the store. But I think what you need to recognize, though, is that this is just the early innings. This is an early test of how this works. And what's more interesting is when you get into some of these stories talking about, and there's another one that just came out, we'll probably have a chance to talk about this next week, where Anthropic internally was having negotiations handled by AI agents. And the stronger the model, the better the negotiation. And so I think what we're going to find is the store is going to be run better if you have a better AI agent that's running it and having access to it and a better infrastructure for it. But obviously, there's going to be more that's done like this. Maybe not yet where it's totally running every aspect of it. But if you're running a store and you can make ultimate decisions and have it run all of the other ordering and the planning and the management of it, and you make decisions about how it would be done, you'd be able to solve all the problems they've outlined for this convenience store and probably already be making money. Where in this case, I think it's already lost $13,000. Entertaining story, starting to show some of the capabilities, though, being built out, and something we need to take seriously, not something just to joke about.
Yeah, the only quick comment I want to make on what you said is that you said, well, the more powerful the model, the better decision or better deals we got, right? Well, that shows that people are going to be willing to pay more for these models like Mythos and these other type things, right? They're going to make it up they're going to make it up on the backside. But, the other thing, another application, right? The UAE, right? They say they want 50% of all government sector services and processes to be run by agentic AI. Right. I don't know if they have I can't remember the timeline for that decision, but within 2 years, pretty quick. So within 2 years, they want half their government operations to be run by AI. I mean, look, some of these countries have some pretty advanced kind of infrastructure, right? That you just need to make this happen, right? But it's just kind of an incredible transformation. Just think what that store is going to be like in 2 years, right? And government services being run by AI. It's all happening. It's unbelievable. And then here we have, just briefly, Norway's running a first autonomous bus without a safety driver. So the buses are driving themselves, and you could say, well, that's human level intelligence because obviously you just take a human to drive the bus. But I haven't seen the studies on buses, but everyone agrees that Waymos are safer than human drivers, right? So maybe the buses get in less accidents too. So maybe we have ASI and bus driving.
It also would be a little bit easier. It's a direct bus route. It's trained on a particular route. It doesn't even have to make other changes like a Waymo or make other changes in direction or respond to much other than anything. Obviously, is preventing collision and be able to deal with other traffic. But I've been to the town that this is in. It's Stavanger, Norway, and it's not that big of a city, a good-sized city. But this is, I think, just another good test case to show of what's really capable.
And then, here's a humanoid robot starts sorting luggage at the Tokyo airport. They say there's a labor shortage. They can't get enough luggage handlers. But, those comments always make me laugh a little bit because it's like, well, once they get this working, are they really just going to be like only use them when they don't have enough human luggage handlers? Or they're going to tell all their human luggage handlers they're good. And it was okay because these people don't have to do this, drudgery job anymore, getting up early and getting to the airport to sort the luggage, right? But, we're just kind of really starting to see, and, the bus is a form of a robot, right? The robot brain's getting pretty sophisticated and advancing.
Now, the last item that we wanted to close on and speak about a little bit is the sense of reaching escape velocity, the fast takeoff or hard takeoff, as it's sometimes referred to. And this is a tweet that was just put out earlier today, talking about it. We're going to ship again this week. Codex has achieved escape velocity and will keep improving rapidly. The idea, of course, is that when you get to the tool, to the stage where it's able to work through self-iteration and self-correction, and the tools are building other tools, it works much faster because not only is it able to work 24/7, it's working faster than a human during those 24 hours in a day, and you can run multiple parallel agents doing it. So you can do many thousands of types of work faster than a human would be able to do this. And we've gone beyond the point of even just using it to support a human. At this stage, it's more like a human supporting some of these coding bots and some of these agentic workflows, and not even really having time to check much of it other than to see if it's meeting the tests, if it's able to meet the production goals, and then let it keep building. I think the theme that we really wanted to explore with this and to have everybody think about is that when we reach that escape velocity, things happen very quickly. Before, when we started seeing a couple of years ago a new model coming out every so many months, think about how long it took between GPT-4 and GPT-5. That was over a year. Then you get to big model changes and some of these other, they call it like a 0.5 or 0.6. Those are still pretty big changes, and they're happening, they was down to like every 47 days that we were seeing a big model release coming out. And now we're starting to see weekly some of those developments that are occurring. And just think about what we've seen with OpenAI. Images 2.0, with codecs coming out with 5.5, 5.5 Pro, different applications and different work that they're doing with workflows. There's a lot that's being built out all at the same time, and it's easy to miss it. And it's easy to not really catch how big these changes are until they start to coalesce. And this is the first sign of that, is when you have codecs built out to such a level and a framework that it's able to then keep improving itself rapidly and reaching escape velocity. Maybe it's not quite there yet. It's certainly, by every indication, getting there very soon. And it's not just for OpenAI. It's also happening with Anthropic. It's happening with Google. And all of the models are starting to develop at this rate. And this is more than a little unnerving. This is where it gets back to that early months of 2020 as we start to think about, you can see what's coming. And I kind of liken it to standing on the edge of a big ravine, and you see some dirt start to fall in, and every once in a while another clump will fall in, and then eventually you have a landslide. And it feels like we're building toward that landslide. And not to present it in negative terms, but it really feels like that the ground is moving under our feet, that things are happening so quickly, and it's just going to speed up.
Yeah, and to go back to our question, right? That we talk about, are we in January 2020 COVID time? Is this are we in January 2020 AI time? And the country kind of started to shut down about the middle of March, right? So it's about 10 weeks, right? So that's where when you started to see kind of that exponential explosion of COVID, right? So are we kind of in terms of a exponential explosion of kind of AI, and I think there's two ways to think about it, right? There's one is just kind of the capabilities of the AI system itself, right? Is that becoming exponential, right? And then the second way is like, well, is it spreading into society at an exponential rate, right? And at some point, the virus kind of became strong enough, and wherever it came from, right, which is debated, and it kind of grew and it got stronger, right? But then it kind of just spread around to people, right? Is AI gonna spread that fast, right? If it spread that fast, right, then that just like that had a big impact on kind of people's health and how the government reacted to it. If AI actually spread that quickly into the economy, right? That would be, people say, oh, we get like 100 years of change in 10. That'd be like 100 years of change in like 10 days, right? Maybe. So I mean, I kind of, my gut, I'm saying, okay, yeah, we probably are of an exponential increase in capabilities. The leaders are saying it, and if you want to discount it a little bit because it's hype, like, okay, right? I don't think Altman's known for hype. Mostaque's not. Emad's not really known for hype. But you could, if you want to discount it a little bit for hype, but that's one indication where they're saying it. Second, you see tweets like this. Okay, we're at escape velocity, which means that it's building itself. We see iterations, like you said, it was like 47 days between 4.4, I think, and 4.5 for ChatGPT, and now it's like a week from one codex model to another. We'll see how big the improvement is. Anthropic's like released a whole new model. We don't know how I'll have access, or hardly anybody has access to the top level model, the Mythos, but they probably have something beyond that, maybe like the NSA, and some of the big banks have what they have above that because they're worried about cybersecurity. We don't really know, but there's kind of this explosion of capabilities. Well, does it kind of we're going to have exponential in society? Probably not. I mean, obviously, if COVID was incredibly contagious, especially at the beginning, right? So it spread in exponential ways. And a lot of people, we already kind of had a maybe exponential access, so to speak, not literally, right? But there's 900 million like weekly ChatGPT users now, right? Like, we already have people using it to a degree. Are we going to have, an exponential explosion in use of the highest capabilities, right? That seems kind of unlikely, right? Most people, right, don't have the ability to use the highest capabilities because they don't, using the most advanced models in the best way does take some technical knowledge. It's expensive, right? Now, even the better models, right, you're going to pay like $200 a month for. So that's excluding people. Whereas, ChatGPT, the 900 million users, I think only 50 million of those are paying. We do see some resistance to this. I don't know that's going to slow it down that much because the AI doesn't need as many workers, right? So workers resisting it, like Meta said, okay, well, fine. If you don't want to do the clicks, you can leave. Like we don't, it's fine. So it doesn't mean it doesn't need any labor, but it's less dependent on labor, but still somewhat, there's energy constraints. Those are probably the big constraint. I imagine. I heard Emad Mostaque said only like 11 million people uh, are using Claude, and that's a lot of people, but it's not anywhere. Imagine if 1 billion people started using Claude. I mean, I don't think we would have the energy capacity or the compute capacity to handle that. And then when you think about robots, like we're not going to all of a sudden have robotic cars, like they're not enabled, right? You can't just go to the lot, buy a car, and stick some LiDAR on it or whatever, and have it drive around. So I think I don't think we're that close to kind of exponential integration. But we're probably, that's my take. We're probably on exponential capabilities. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I would start with the implementation and integration in society. And the real bottlenecks are, as you noted, energy and data compute. And if we don't have the data centers for everyone or 1 billion people to be using Codex or CoWork at full scale. So even if there's a great development, that development would also have to include such efficiencies that would allow that many more people to be able to use it. So even if everyone wanted to, it's going to take time before the compute capabilities are there and the energy capabilities are there to be able to support it widespread. Aside from that, there's also the concern that for any implementation of a new technology, it takes a while for that to be integrated in society. Even if every company wanted to start to incorporate AI to reduce, to reduce inefficiencies, to radically increase productivity, to lay off a lot of workers, they don't know how, they don't have the support network for it yet, and they don't have the access to all of the compute for that to happen. So that's going to slow it down. And so I'm not really that worried about that. I think there's still a little bit of a concern about maybe there is the need for another breakthrough. Demis Hassabis is not known as somebody that is just a promoter of trying to hype something up. And when he says it's maybe a 50-50 shot, that makes me think there is a chance. Hopefully, there will be a little bit of a roadblock to or at least a rumble strip to slow it down a little bit, because I think we're going to need more time to start to react to it. Societal-wide implementation, it's going to take longer. There's no way that happens in a short period of time. I'm far more concerned, though, about the capabilities that you were outlining, Stefan, because if they do continue to increase at this pace, and let's say it even slows a little bit, there's a reason to think that they're not going to allow it to slow if it's in their power. And that's because OpenAI and Anthropic are both looking at IPOs this year. XAI as well with SpaceX, and they'll be the first one that'll be coming up in a few months. Each company is trying to throw everything they can to increase the value of their company, which means that unfortunately drives through profit interests. That's going to overwhelm any safety concerns. They're not going to be worried about trying to hold back. And it's surprising that Anthropic has held back with Mythos. I don't know that OpenAI would with the same capabilities. I don't know that Anthropic will again, depending upon what's happening with it. And maybe for Anthropic, it was a little bit easier because they knew they didn't have the compute to support widespread use. And they also are on the side of safety. So then maybe that's held them back a little bit. I'm very concerned, though, that even without widespread integration and implementation, the impacts on society are going to be very vast if something like Mythos gets in the wrong hands. If you see radical increase in capabilities, and it might not even be a new model, but when we were talking last week about Kimi 2 being able to run at near benchmark levels with a less capable model, but by running 300 parallel sub-agents, then it just might be a new technique that somebody is able to put together. And it might be a computer scientist that finds a new way to take an open source model and radically increase the capabilities of that open source model by running it with hardware that they have access to and running lots of sub-agents. If you get to that stage and you have a model that's already kind of at the precipice of being able to do really advanced, maybe AGI work, and you can get it there through the harness or the application that you're using, then it's not about everybody using it. It's about how disruptive that one one act is going to be and what could be done with it. I think we're going to start to hear more stories about and rumblings about whether or not the government should take over some of these companies, whether or not they should gain greater control over what's happening with the companies. And there's a delicate tightrope, kind of a dance going on, and they're balancing on this tightrope between wanting to stay private companies, making sure they give the government enough access and support and understanding and kind of not really explicit control, but some implicit control over what's happening. That's probably an example of what's going on with Mythos to prevent that kind of government control over it. But once geopolitics gets involved, I mean, for instance, what happens if you find out China does have something that's far more advanced than what we have? How does the U.S. respond to that? How does the Trump administration respond to that? And similarly, if the U.S. government says we do have this capability, we've been testing Mythos, and maybe they don't announce it, but maybe there's a signal that they've been using it for, maybe for a cyber attack against another country. What does that lead to? And that kind of destabilization is something that really worries me.
Yeah, just 3 quick comments before we conclude. One, I really wonder if they lost, they held back that much in a meaningful way because, like you said, they're kind of a bit compute constrained, and they gave it to all the banks, right? Like who can pay the most? The banks, the military, right? They said, hey, banks, you need this for like cybersecurity, right? And I've read something from like someone at Deutsche Bank saying like, oh, we want more, we can't even get it, like right. So they're kind of giving away all they have to the top paying customers, right? But I also kind of think that's motivating the strategy of like, you said they want to IPO, but where can they get the best, like the most money, kind of, so to speak, the biggest contract the fastest, right? Like all the very kind of top level of industry. The second thing I want to say is that people have been talking about nationalization. I'm skeptical because basically all the people who work in these labs are like multimillionaires, and they're going to be when it IPOs. And they're not going to want to work for the government. They'll just quit. They don't need to work anymore if they don't want to. And what is government? It's not like they're steel workers, right? When you nationalize an industry and the people who need to keep going to work to feed their families, these people can just bolt. So I don't know. Nationalization is really practical. But the third thing that no one's really talking about, everyone's talking about Russia, China. I mean, U.S. China competition. But what are the Russians thinking? They're not even in this game at all. Right? Like, what are they going to think about in the U.S.? We have this Mythos and maybe AGI on like, top of that. And we have these amazing offensive cyber, operations that can disable so much of their military planning and maybe share some of this with the Ukraine, who has probably the most advanced drones in the world now, that's like, capturing enemy positions without any soldiers. How does Russia really kind of respond to this? And it might not be something we want to think about or conclude the podcast on, but no one's really even talking.
Let me respond to that second point about nationalization. I think that the one little wrinkle to that I might disagree with is that you're probably right that a lot of people would leave the company. They would say, we're not just going to work for the government. But if you're the federal government and you see a company, whichever company it is, has gotten to true ASI, you don't really worry about developing much further. You just want to control what it is that you have that's so much more capable than what anybody else has. So even if all the workers leave,
Yeah,
if
you
you
still
have
got
that
the
model and you
AI to
control
build
it,
it out.
that's it. Yeah, and you'll be able to find some computer scientists. They'll be able to maintain it and probably let it develop into something much greater. At that stage, it's more about having a secure data center that allows it to self-control, be able to self-iterate, to be able to build itself even further. You might not need a lot of humans at that stage. But even if you're worried about having humans, I think they'll be more worried about the immediate ramifications.
When we
A
get
lot
it,
more to think about, obviously.
yeah, just at the end here, as we get to the end, this stuff's really getting as serious as students writing papers with AI. It's really kind of getting pretty deep. So we'll see you next week.
We'll end with that sarcasm. Excellent. Thanks, Stefan. See you next week.